Hi, Alan Cox here. In part 3 of our adaptive protection series, and the final part of our adaptive protection series, I want to talk about conditional access policies and how that can play a role in adaptive protection and how we can use adaptive protection in our conditional access policies. In part 1, we kind of talked about the kind of high-level overview, what adaptive protection is, how do we enable it, what are some basic configuration settings. In part 2, we talked about how we can apply that to a DLP policy so that a user that has a history of risky behavior may get one policy, whereas a user that does not may get an entirely different policy or rule set inside of a DLP policy. Well, today it's a very similar thing, but we're going to talk about conditional access policy. Maybe we have one condition that says if you're going to access Microsoft 365 and you have, say, a moderate risk, then maybe you get flagged for, and require MFA in order to authenticate or access 365 data and applications. Whereas if you're elevated risk because of user behavior, then maybe it's just a full stop block to the 365 environment. And so anyway, those are some of the things we could do within conditional access policies, and that's going to be our topic today. So let's get started. All right, so we covered the high-level overview of adaptive protection, what it is, what it can do, how we turn it on, and a few basic configurations. And then we talked about and demoed how we would set this up using a DLP policy. So in data loss prevention, how we can provide different rules within that policy based on user risk level. So now we want to do a similar thing, but we want to do it to using conditional access policies. Okay, so that's what we're going to take a look at now. So we're going to jump right in here, and here I am in Purview again. We're going to go down here to insider risk management, and when we go to insider risk management, then we're going to go down to adaptive protection. And here is that data loss prevention policy that we set up in our previous video there. And so now we're going to look at this conditional access policy and some things we can do there. So we go to conditional access, we can see that we do not have a conditional access policy here. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't have any conditional access policies, just like this does not mean that we only have one DLP policy. In fact, we've got multiple DLP policies, but only one policy that is linked to an insider risk level, okay, or so that's using some adaptive protection within it, only one policy. Same thing with conditional access policy. I may have multiple conditional access policies, but currently have none that are tied to an adaptive protection or an insider risk policy. So we're going to go and do that. We're going to create this conditional access policy. Going to take us out here to Entra ID or entra.microsoft.com. And then once this gets loaded up here, we'll see this policy. And now the one thing that's different is you will have different policies for different risk levels, right? So that is a little different, whereas in DLP, you can have a single policy, but in there you have multiple rules for different risk levels. In this case, we might do, let's do this. Let's do adaptive protection. This is going to be an adaptive protection, and we're going to say minor, we'll say moderate, and then maybe I don't know, maybe we're going to force an MFA prompt here, right? So just to give you an example, there's a lot we can do here. So we can do this, and user and agents, we can apply this to all users. Now, I do recommend, and you definitely want to make sure that you have some admin accounts or something that is excluded from a particular policy. And so that's just as a best practice. Now, I'm not going to turn this policy on. We're just going to have it in report only mode here anyway, so it's fine. But it is warning, anytime you're using conditional access policies, you have to be careful not to, if it's going to be something that's going to lock somebody out or block somebody from accessing anything, then you may be very careful with that. So just fair warning there. Now, target resources here. You can get really pretty granular with this. We can do all agent resources in preview right now. So if there's a Copilot agent or whatever, but all resources was formerly cloud app, or we can select resources here. And I'm going to select specific resources here, and I'm just going to use the 365 app. Now, if you have an enterprise application, that SaaS app or something like that, you can block that. So there's a lot of apps in here that may be, if you want to get really granular and say, for example, if we want to apply this, let me just see here. If we want to do, actually I want to do Microsoft Forms, Microsoft To Do, so we can get really granular with this if I want to, but I'm just going to include all apps for now, all 365 apps. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to select that. So we have 365 apps. I'm not doing any of that. We're not doing network locations. You can't do locations, whether you trust a particular location. So if it's, on network, off network, etc., you can do that. We're not going to do any of that. But the condition here that we're going to look for, now we can look at a lot of things. Now, understand this user risk. This is user risk levels and sign-in risk levels. That's part of Entra ID protection or governance ID. That's different. What we're looking for here is this insider risk. So if I say insider risk here, and I'm going to say, yeah, we're going to configure that. We're going to say moderate, because remember, it's a moderate level we're looking at here. So I'm going to say, okay, yeah, that's fine. Moderate level. Now, by the way, okay, yeah, so that's good. So we're going to do a moderate level here. I can determine device platforms if I want. So is this going to apply to any device? That's fine. Be any device. Again, we can zero into locations, specific cloud apps here. I'm just going to select, yeah, we're going to do everything. It doesn't matter if they're coming in from a browser, from an mobile phone app. It doesn't matter. Now, grant, we are going to allow, right? But if you're in this moderate, if you're in this moderate condition, then we're going to allow. But remember, we're going to say based on our name here, and we can do any number of these. We're going to require multi-factor authentication, but we could require a device to be marked compliant, which means it basically has to be in tune, enrolled, or joined. We can do required an app protection policy, require risk remediation, require all or any of these, any of the checked or all. Okay, this is just basic conditional access policy stuff. So we're going to select here. We could do under session. I'm not, but we could do under session that we can do a sign-in frequency, persistent browser session. We can do any number of these things here. But the point is that our condition for this, if this user falls into a moderate risk, the condition here is basically going to say we're allowing it, but we're going to force a require multi-factor authentication. Again, moderate risk. So there's been some whatever that risk level is there, an insider risk. We're going to say select here. We're going to create this. So that's that. Then what we might do is we could go in and we could now create a, and directly from here, we don't have to go back over to adaptive protection. We can do it from here because we can go policies here, and now I can say, okay, let's do a new policy. And this time we're going to do, it's an adaptive protection, okay? And you can do whatever. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to name it however. I'm just naming it. And we're going to do elevated, and we're just going to do full scale block, right? That's it. We're just going to do a block here. And now we're going to apply this to all users, but again, don't lock yourself out. Target resources, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do select resources. We're going to do 365 apps, which pretty much all of the 365 suite. We could do any cloud apps. That's SaaS apps. That's anything. But I'm just targeting 365 apps, whatever you decide to do there. Now, conditions here, this condition is if this insider risk is elevated, okay, and that's our difference is. We can say device platforms. It really doesn't matter. We're going to say, yeah, any device. And I could say client apps is pretty much any client app that they're using, doesn't matter. We do filtering for devices. I didn't really talk about this, but we could filter different devices here. I'm not going to configure that at this point. And same thing with authentication flows, a little bit outside the scope of what we're doing here. The point is that I have selecting all users with a targeted resource of Microsoft 365. But my condition is that they have to be an elevated risk. And actually, an elevated risk, this condition would be, yeah, any number of these. But if they come from an elevated risk, so then we're going to do the grant control here. And this is going to be just a full scale block, right? Yeah, so we're just going to block their access, right? So they have to figure out what their risk level is, and we can do again session controls and all of that. So that's just how we might do that. So we're going to create this again, very basic, very simple, but there's a lot of options that we have here, a lot of things that we can do here. So I'm going to refresh this, and I'm going to look at my policies in the conditional access space. It looks like total I only have 2 conditional access policies. I could have more, but these are right here. But this tells me, remember our naming convention says, okay, it's if I know AP stands for adaptive protection, you can spell it out however you want. But I know that an elevated block, I can look at it and know who. Basically, all these are applied to everybody, but I know basically who it's applied to, what it is, and what the result is, what the action is, right? So now if we go to back to adaptive protection here, and I were to refresh this, I should see 2 policies, because both of those policies are tied back to an insider risk policy of a risk level, and there we go. And so they are both active, and it tells me the insider risk level and what we have going on there. Again, here are the insider risk levels, and it's based on any type of action and what that is. And again, we talked about how we can monitor, configure this and modify all of that. Do we have any users assigned any of these risk levels? No users are currently assigned that risk level. But again, we have conditional access policies. So now if we go back to our dashboard, we'll see that we have 2 conditional access policies and 1 DLP policy. So that is how we can tie a conditional access policy to a adaptive protection with an insider risk policy. So I hope this has been helpful for you, and thanks for watching.